I was born in North Wales and left there when I was 18 and went off and farmed in Kenya, where in fact I learnt to fly a couple of years before the war. I got a bursary from the local flying club, the first one they'd ever given actually. So I did have an A license, but no more when war broke out. I'd always been keen to join an RAF reserve, and they were always talking of forming it, but never got it done.
So on the outbreak of war, you came back to?
No, I joined up in Kenya.
Oh, you joined in Kenya?
They did 4 or 5 courses in Kenya of Tiger type flying only, and you then went off to Havana, which is just outside Baghdad, where number 4 FTS was, which was the only flying training school that had been outside England before the war. It had been in Egypt at Abu Swear, but they moved it to Havana and we went there.
Right. And what happened? That would have been when?
Well, in 40. I joined up, I can't remember when, but we finished our course and we're back in Egypt on the 11th of November 1940.
And then?
Then you had to go through what they called an operational training unit, which was nothing more than a rather bare conversion onto a Blenheim, which I never flew again. There was no operational training whatsoever.
Oh, right.
Which it's the whole, I'm not talking about other flying training schools, the whole of the flying training school was based on pre-war organization, in other words, emphasis on spit and polish, and things that you were taught that were quite unnecessary in the operational thing.
1940?
Oh yes, absolutely. I mean, you had to learn off by heart how bombs of different shapes from different altitudes and different speeds, the exact thing they'd have to drop on. Well, that didn't matter. All you wanted to know is how to work the bomb sight, have the theory just basically there, and what was your alumin made from, the exact contents of the different metals, all those sorts of things. Peacetime training, but it's...
and then, so can you take us from there up until you were back?
Yes. Then after, in actual fact, we were there, they just couldn't fit us in. We were hanging about doing nothing for a long time, and I got fed up and got leave and went back to Kenya. I wanted to see the farm I'd bought the day before I left Kenya. I'd been only a farm manager until then, and I wanted to have a look at that, amongst other things. And then I went back and we did this conversion course, and I was then sent to 39 Squadron, which had been Blenheims in Singapore, in fact, had come to Egypt and was being equipped with Marylands. Marylands were an American-built machine, built for the French, but the French opted out, as one knows, and they were being shipped across to Takoradi, which is in what's now Ghana, in West Africa, and being flown across. The first ones, everything was in French. You even flew in kilometers per hour, while the RAF then was flying in miles per hour, not in the nautical mile, it was the statute mile. That was altered during the war. And your height was in meters, your temperatures in centigrade, and everything was completely different. And then the next aeroplane you got in, half had been altered to American type things and half hadn't. An American boost, for instance, English boost was in pounds per square inch. American was in inches of mercury, and the French were in millimeters of mercury. So you had conversions in your head the whole time, which have been useful since.
Well, that's right. What type of aircraft were they in?
It was rather like a Blenheim, but it had 2 super engines, variable speed props instead of just the 2 position props, and instead of cruising at 170, you cruised at about 220. But you carried the same bomb load, but instead of a bomb load, you could put in that amount of petrol and then have a fantastic range. In fact, I did 9.5 hours flying, which is a long time. Well, anyway, I did one trip down to Takoradi to bring one back. We had nothing much to do in the squadron, very few aeroplanes to fly, only about 3 or 4. So we were going down in batches and bringing them up. It was experience. Also, they were going to be better flown than some of the pilots who were doing it, who were rather odds and sods, and losing aeroplanes on the way.
And you brought that back to?
I brought it back to a place called Chandur, which was a temporary landing place on the canal just south of the Bitter Lake. And then one of the flights went off temporarily to Fuka Satellite, which was near Fuka in the Western Desert, and they were on photo reconnaissance. The Wellingtons were on bombing Tobruk and beyond, right away there, way beyond there, and they were doing the photographic reconnaissance next day of it. And then the other flight that I was in, we were sent up, well, 2 or 3 of us were, because the Sunderlands, which patrolled the bed, had been used in the evacuation of Greece. And they'd flown regardless of ours. They just poured in petrol and oil and went on flying. So the second that was over, they were all grounded. And we were put on to fly daily to Malta, and then which we did far too quickly compared to the Sunderlands, going about double their speed. So one pilot would go to Malta, where there was already another pilot, and he flew from Malta to Greece and back in the afternoon, and then you came back next day, and sort of making a rota like that. Well, I took off in the early morning, and in fact, I suddenly had an air gunner given me that I'd never even met before, because you really wanted an air gunner as well as a wireless operator, air gunner in the back. The Maryland was a peculiar aeroplane in that you and the navigator in the front. The navigator was sitting on the floor quite a long way away from you in front, up a long nose. Then behind you was the bomb bay. The French didn't stow their bombs vertically, so the whole thing had to be altered to stow the bombs like this, one above each other. And that bay, as I say, you could take that rack out and put it in a tank, which we had done for that job. But there was no means of communication from there to the back, where there were 2 guns, one on top and one underneath, and the wireless said, if the intercom backed up, we were putting in a tube and a couple of bits of string. That's right, very, very primitive indeed, to get notes back and forth, but it hadn't been done on that one. There wasn't even a place for a Gary pistol, but that had been put in. That wasn't armor plating, but that had been done, and so sealing had been added. They were beautiful airplanes to fly, but not really an operational type of airplane. It was a pure stopgap. The Baltimore followed it, and I think the Baltimore was a much better aeroplane always, but that was made specifically for the British. Anyway, we set off. We got to the point in Greece. We flew roughly north to Greece, and we hit where we wanted to turn absolutely to the minute and the degree. Then we turned off to the left, as you might say, to go west, generally to Malta. When we got near Malta, the weather was murky, putting it mildly. Well, I guess that was quite common around the island itself. So we automatically asked for a bearing. No, it was all diddy-diddy. You couldn't talk or anything like that. It was all primitive, as you might say, and all had to be done in code as well. And answer came there none. We did it several times, and answer came there none. And so I said, well, right, what we'll do now is fly north to Sicily, see where we are on Sicily, and then come back and do a square search. You know, if we don't hit it straight off. You had to hit it from the south in any case, otherwise you'd have been fired at. Well, on our way, while we were there at Sicily, I went up high for that, having been low before. We hit a hell of a bump. And shortly after that, I found we had no intercom. Now, you can't do much without radio, well, intercom contact on a thing like that, because you couldn't pass, by the time you passed notes, you went a long way. So I said the only thing to do was to get back to Crete, which was still British. Greece had fallen, but Crete hadn't. And the petrol didn't make it. The extraordinary thing was, after the war, my neighbour in Kenya, who was a marine type, mariner type, he'd been merchant navy, so he rejoined the navy. And he told me one evening in Colombo, in Ceylon, he was, as usual, having a noggin in the evening with some friends, and one of them was an RAF officer, and somehow or other my name cropped up, and the RAF officer, who was a signals officer, said, "I'm afraid it was my fault he went into the bag. I sent him a wrong signal." Well, I'd never even had the signal, which he didn't know, but it was astonishing finding that little bit of information out quite some time after the war from my neighbour in Kenya.
So you didn't get the signal, but if you had, it was still...
It would be no good. I mean, it's unbelievable, really, isn't it?
Absolutely. Incredible, incredible. So,
well, we landed in the sea alongside a village. We had a dinghy on board. I'd suggested several times to the CEO that we took it down to the canal, or one of them, pull the string and, you know, see how efficient it was. Well, we pulled the string, blew bubbles and sank. This, I gather, from after the war, meeting not an air sea, but a sea rescue type who was a fisherman from north. He said they always carried 3 dinghies, 2 English and a German. And the German one always worked if the British failed, which is a rather terrible admission, isn't it? And 2 of the crew couldn't swim, which I'd no idea of, but we all had Mae Wests, and an unripped parachute can keep you, that in itself is another Mae West. And we only had, I don't know what, 100 yards or whatever it was to swim, where we were met by the Greeks, who were frightfully friendly and all over us, and took us off to various houses, dried our clothes, gave us something to eat, which it was then, I suppose, 4 or 5 o'clock. Well, I knew it was 9.5 hours, and we'd taken off about 8 or whatever it was. So we were fairly hungry, putting it mildly. We'd had breakfast and nothing more. And there were obviously 2 lots of Greeks, both friendly, both wanted to help us get a boat to Crete, which is what I said, get us to Crete. But they wouldn't have anything to do with each other. And we got in with the wrong lot. And we marched all night. I say marched, walked all night. I mean, just cross country there was no road there or anything, it was just tracks. And arrived wherever it was. I didn't know where. I said, just wait, I'll go and get the boat. And we all passed out, absolutely dead asleep. I mean, this was, I don't know, midnight or something, so we were pretty tired. Woke up, and some other people had come in, so I immediately asked them for a boat. I hadn't noticed they were wearing German uniform, you know, straight out of sleep. So that was into the bag very quickly.
So you were, I suppose, sent to a transit camp. Would that have been?
Yeah, well, what they did that night, they motored us off to a hospital where in it was a fellow called Henry Lamont, flight lieutenant, captain of Sunderland, and also one of his crew, Bill Goldfinch. And that was the first time I met them both. They'd been in the Sunderland that crashed. In fact, I was with Bill Goldfinch until the very end of the war, and he designed the glider, and we still keep up tight. Henry Lamond, it was a New Zealander, but he married an English girl who he was engaged to then, and he still lives in England, and funnily enough, his wife's sister married an officer from Colditz as well. Extraordinary how small things go around, the world is going round. And Henry, I've only seen Henry 3 or 4 times since then, and we've only been together twice. The last time was just over a year ago at Bill Goldfinch's 80th birthday, when he didn't know we were going to be there, or a lot of other people. But anyway, I left them there because they were both still in hospital, and my crew, there were the 4 of us, they were all sergeants in fact, were then sent off to a Luftwaffe squadron, and each given a sort of a tiny tent, a 6x6 tent, and 1 guard on us in the day and 2 at night, and fed with exactly the same food as the Luftwaffe were getting, which was very good. And we just gone to bed one night, and along came some army, German army types, who were definitely of the thug type. And the CO, it was quite obvious he didn't like letting us go. He was an extremely nice, gentlemanly person. You know, couldn't speak in English to him, he knew no English, but he was obviously very friendly, and, well, it might have been him, you know, that sort of attitude. Whether he shook my hand as we went, or whether he only saluted, I'm honestly not sure. But, you know, it was a friendly parting, but he didn't like us going, and it was into the back of a lorry at the end of a bayonet, very much, and I did rather wonder what was going to happen. I think he did. In fact, they took us from there to Corinth and dumped us in a good old-fashioned English bell tent, huge great tent, parked on the gravel. And they just went in there, each one in one on their own. No talking or anything like that. I may say in the early part, we'd been in a car being motored up from Kalamata, where I think it was we were picked up eventually. And so the officer said to me at one moment, he said, well, we know you're in the Blenheim. We know all about it. We got your, not the diary, but the route and all the rest of it, and everything from the navigator's things, and he's left-handed. Well, that was an easy one to work out, but I immediately said to the others, you know, it's a Blenheim. So it was a good thing to have some wrong information, and we then knew that didn't know anything anyway, because they hadn't got it up.
Was that the only interrogation you had?
No. After several days in this bell tent, we had to get food at all. But there was a guard on outside. What was quite interesting, just across the other side of the quay was a restaurant, which was rather mouth-watering to us. But anyway, there were the Germans going freely in and out of there all the time. The Italians didn't dare go in. It was very pleasing to see the lack of brotherly love between the Italians and Germans, even then. They then moved us, put us in the back of a lorry, allowed to talk freely, and took us across the Corinth Canal, which was quite fun having a look down at it, and took us to Athens, and took us straight off to the King George Hotel that was German headquarters. And there we were interrogated by an extremely pleasant, very good English-speaking major. I said to him at the end, I said, it'd be very interesting to meet you at the end of the war and find out what you found out from me or didn't find out from me. It was done in a very pleasant way, but we had absolutely no instruction ever of what to say or what not to say. This, you see, we were from the Middle East. Middle East in the First War, Middle East in the Second War.
So you hadn't considered being captured at all?
We hadn't
considered that you may be captured?
No.
And maybe
I don't think it ever went through anybody's individual mind. I mean, in England they were trained fairly well on it. even from the word go. I mean, to the extent that a certain number of regulars were taught a code in case they were taken prisoner, right after they'd got sufficient of them there, no one more was taught the code. And by the end, they really were absolutely ginned up. But we'd never been told that all you give is your name, number, rank, and date of birth.
Really?
Nope.
And presumably you had no equipment either, because they had...
Oh, no, nothing at all.
So
Absolutely nothing, and I'm sure we all must have said more than we ought to have done. Because you ought to have said nothing. What was quite interesting there, to show the German mentality a bit, I wanted to go to the lavatories, I went there. When I came back, the German major was very apologetic. He said, I must apologize for that, but you see, in Greece there aren't many waterborne lavatories, so they still put all the paper in a waste paper basket. Now, they'd been there several days, they never cleaned the waste paper baskets out. I thought, oh my God, you're not as civilized as you pretend to be.
So how did you get from Greece then, having gone through your interrogation, to Germany?
We then spent several days there in old army barracks, having a lovely view of the Parthenon. It was the second time I'd seen it in my life. I'd flown over it flying back to England a few years before. I got there in the end, but that wasn't for many years later. And they took us off one night to Piraeus, which is the port, and put us on board a ship down the hold, together with a lot of other people. I don't know, I mean, there were 200 or 300, I suppose, or more, of all ranks. The others are obviously all army. And off we sailed. We didn't know where we were going to. In fact, they were taking us to Salonika. Nobody thought about food for us or anything like that. They had built latrines overhanging the side of the ship, which is sort of quite unnerving, me right out over the side of the ship. We then got to Salonika, and we were put in an old Greek barracks, and we were there, might have been a month. There were no Greeks in it, but there were a lot of bed bugs, putting it mildly. And gradually more and more British came in. The next ship that came up was sunk on a mine. It had Yugoslavs and a certain amount of numbers in it, and quite a lot of people were drowned, unfortunately. The next lot that came up, which included Bill Goldfinch and Henry Lamont, so we got together again. They brought them up by train so far. Then the tunnel had been blown up by the British, so they had to march over the mountain, get in another train and come on, which was quite hard work, I think. Anyway, they all joined us there, then after quite a long time there. Food there was rather curious. It was pretty awful. We thought it was terrible, but we were not indoctrinated then, like we became later, or whatever we like to call it. And it was so tasteless, we put salt on everything. In fact, I eventually burnt my tongue slightly with salt, we all did. And at the very end of the war, we were craving for salt. We went from one extreme to the other during the course of the war. They then put us in cattle trucks, and we were there actually a week before we got to Biberach. We went up through some lovely country, up through the Balkans there. It was really lovely, Munich and Ulm, and then got a little place called Biberach, which was a big army camp. In fact, it was a German army camp, a rest camp from when they were in the Siegfried Line. So that it was a well-built camp, double glazing and all that sort of thing. And it was just in sight of the Swiss Alps. I was there for 6 months. There were 4 of us, RAF then. The other, well, the 2 I mentioned, another fellow, and I'd known him anyway in Egypt. And I knew the squadron he'd gone to with various other of my friends who trained with me. And we were there for 6 months. While we were there, one party of 4 got out and got across, or various got out before we actually made the home run to Switzerland. The senior British officer there was a fellow called Colonel Todd, who eventually was our senior British officer at Colditz.
So this would have been about when? From the 42?
I left in September. There till about roughly 6 months, till about September 40. Then what happened then, I think the whole camp was moved shortly afterwards, but they pulled out the 4 of us, Air Force, and there were 4 naval types, and sent them off. The naval went to Marlag, and we went right away up to Bath, B-A-R-T-H, up on the Baltic. It took, I think we were about 36 hours travelling, I can't remember, carrying our little and all through the underground in Berlin and all sorts of things. It was third class, so it was a lot more comfortable than the other, although third class in those days was hard ass all the time. Bath was a very different sort of camp. That was a wooden hutted, purpose-built camp, only 3 blocks of huts, quite small, on a sandy subsoil, so it was very easy tunnelling, but the water table was only about 5 or 6 feet down, so you couldn't go any depth. Tunnelling was rife there, as you might say, all organised by Jimmy Buckley, who was a very famous RAF ex, and eventually disappeared in the Baltic. And I think he must have drowned there, having escaped. Nobody knows for a certainty. While we were there, we were involved in, well, lots of various diggings and things. We got caught in a tunnel, the 3 of us, once. And another interesting thing that happened there, the wireless had been used they had a wireless on, German organised and switched on at odd times, giving awful martial music and their phony broadcasts and things like that. And they were being used, broken into all the time, because they got magnets in them, and the magnets could be used to make compasses. The Germans got onto this, and they said, right, there was quite a nice security officer there, who had been the security officer at Dulag, and amongst us with all the original crew from Dulag, who were there for quite a time, then moved on to Bath. And he knew this one fellow well, and he said, right, I'll put these wireless transmitters back, the loudspeakers back, but they'll be sealed. And if you play with those seals, right, it won't do anything, but, he said, I will give you the British news at midnight, very quietly, so you can listen to that. Which he did. In fact, the loudspeaker was just outside our room, and it was our duty in our block to go out to the pencil and paper and make notes and tell everybody the news next morning. But while we were there was a lot of information getting to the Germans about tunnels in an incredibly quick time, which is very nasty because lots of people fall under suspicion. You know. Then we went into the cells for a fortnight. We'd been caught in this tunnel, and while we were there, a tunnel we knew about was suddenly walked into, and they said, they're so-and-so, they've been talking in the cells. Yes, we came under suspicion. We heard when he came back. Then while we were there, another tunnel was found that had started before we went in. So they realized that wasn't us, and the other was probably imagination. Anyway, what it was eventually we found out, the Germans had put a transmitter into each one of these wireless sets, loudspeakers. And they kept the loudspeaker switched on most of the time, although it wasn't onto anything. So they were, and we used to walk up and down the passages at night discussing things. They were cunning. Before that, again, they'd had microphones in the walls everywhere, but they'd all been found out gradually and either destroyed, and on occasion the mains connected to them, which didn't do the sets any good in the German commentator on the other end. They realized, it's the only camp I know where they put them in, and certainly didn't try it, either in Colditz or in any other RAF camp. They realized that we weren't that simple.
So where did you then go from Bath?
From Bath,
How long were you there?
again 6 months, give and take, so we left about April. They had put in sound detectors all around the camp there. So the tunnelling there was getting very, very difficult. They then decided to close that camp, and I was in the first with Bill Goldfinch, and I had got into a room together there for the first time. We hadn't been at Beaver Rock and Henry Lamont, and we went from there to Zargan, which was the brand new camp, and we in fact were the first people to get into Zargan at all. Literally on the first, we were one train load. One person jumped out of the train on the way there, but unfortunately they heard him land on the gravel, which was bad luck, and the train was stopped and they pulled him in again, which was very bad luck. But we were literally the first in there. It didn't take Wings Day with the CO at Bath and at all the time I was in Zargan as well, who again was like, in a different way, but like Willie Todd, a unique person and absolutely outstanding. One couldn't have had more outstanding senior British officers. The time I was a prisoner, there were one or two others, but they were the two main ones. And there were various attempts, including Wings Day. He never stopped, practically straight away, but they all got caught. Now, Bill Goldfinch had registered with Henry, and I came in on it as well, a scheme to dig what was called a mole. In other words, you dug a short length of tunnel, sealed yourself in, dug it in front and filled it up behind, overcoming the disposal problem, which is one of the biggest problems of the lot. We didn't have time to use it while we were at Bath, because we were there mainly in the winter, and that winter was unbelievably cold. We were on an inlet of the Baltic and the whole of that froze, which gives you an idea of how cold it is. And we had a fire hydrant in the middle of the garden. We turned that on, flooded the garden, and got a good skating rink. Well, I don't know if you've ever tried to do that in England. It thaws out and disappears straight away. Probably wasn't a very good skating rink, but it gave us an awful lot of fun. Red Cross produces some skates. We even played ice hockey of a sort, but a lot of fun.
Was that also down at Sargent?
That was done at, no, Bath.
Oh, because I thought there was a skating rink at Sargent.
Not that, I didn't hear of one at Zargan. I don't think it ever got cold enough there, being a lot further south, and I don't know the winters were quite as cold as that one. I know it went well into minus Fahrenheit, but I can't remember now what it was, but I know it was far too cold, but we did have a reasonable ration of coal compared to what we didn't have later on.
Going back to your moulling scheme.
Yes.
How did you get over the problem of air?
Putting up held. I'll give you the details of that, because we eventually did that in Zargan. It was still, you might say, the scheme was carried forward as registered and approved by Jimmy Buckley and co. And what happened, it was a very well-designed camp, Zargan, in that it was 100 yards, 300 feet. You'd have to dig for a tunnel from any hut to get just beyond the wire, which is a hell of a lot of earth to dispose of. I mean, it worked it out well. And there were already in sound detectors all around the wire. And we reckon if you can get someone to start closer, it's a lot better. There was a wash house, and that was a bit closer. The wash house had a soakaway for the basins, which was just an open pit. Well, again, that was on sand as well. The topsoil was about a foot, perhaps, yes, about a foot of blackish earth with pine roots all over it. In fact, they'd cut the young pine trees down and to make the camp. And so once you were below that, you could dig pretty fast. It was easy digging in this, and it was fairly strong, the top. People walking over it, I never heard of them going through, but the Germans did learn the trick of sending a horse and cart round the perimeter track, and a horse's foot, with a bit of bad luck, would go through it, depending on where they hit it, obviously. And they did that periodically. Anyway, these soakaways started clogging up rather naturally. Bill was a civil engineer in Salisbury, where he stayed when he came back, and was eventually #2 there and retired early under all this amalgamation that happened many years ago now. And he and I had been great friends and were doing a lot of things together, large and nefarious tunnelling and so on. And we had practiced, the three of us, being sealed down, so we knew we didn't suffer from claustrophobia. Well, eventually we decided that this was the place to do the tunnel from, but obviously one had to wait a time until it clogged up again. And the powers that be said, that's okay. And the day came, and much against our will, they gave us a complete stooging. So while we were preparing, people would be walking up and saying, well, there's a German in the outside compound, I don't know whether he's coming in or not. All this going on all the time. It drew attention to us. So the next thing was, a German did come up. And we had then done a few feet of the tunnel. Henry was up the tunnel, and I was digging, or where Bill was at that moment, I can't remember. But it was luckily a very hot day. There wasn't time to get him out. I said, for God's sake, keep quiet in there. I've got to sort of try and cover you up, covered up what I could, sat on top of the hole, and said, share height, which means fucking hot, as you might say, which is the only German that I could cope with. And I knew he didn't speak English at all, this German, luckily. And so the next fellow who turned along, because a lot of them were coming along, they didn't know what we were doing, and they got a shock sometimes. I said, for God's sake, get somebody to get this bastard off my back. And he did. He got somebody along, and we just packed it up for the day quick. I mean, let the water in as good. And we then got permission that the next time they had to give us no shooting at all. We said, it's much better to gamble. It didn't work, and it obviously wouldn't work another time. But what happened, that we waited quite a long time, and then there's an old story, and I can't remember, Friday night's dream on Saturday told bound to come true, but I've forgotten how it goes. Anyway, I dreamt that we did it on Friday night, and we said, well, that's as good a reason as any to do it tomorrow. And tomorrow came, and we started digging, perfectly genuinely. There was a football match going on, and when there's a football match going on, one of the ferrets would be in to retrieve the football if it went over the guard wire. And in fact, Charlie was in, and Charlie was the head ferret who had come with us from Bath, so we all knew each other well. And he was a very decent, most efficient type, but he was a decent type. When the football match had finished, he came over and chatted to us on the way out. Now that was absolutely marvellous, because he gave us an okay to all the guards outside. They'd want the chief there to come and talk to us, and what we were doing was above board. Well, the second he got out, then we did start digging like hell. The hole got no bigger, more and more earth piled up. Then it came to the evening appel time, so we just filled the hole in so that it looked all right, went off and accounted, and our mess had got a jolly good meal for us. And then we put our clothes on and went out. We were just in ordinary RAF battle dress. Virtually no food, because there wasn't much game in, but we had some, do you know. And we had, I suppose probably it was a litre of water in a bottle, which was pretty primitive. And we went out one by one, started digging, and then dropped down the hole and crawled in. Another fellow was helping us, an Australian, and he was going to seal us in as soon as we'd all got in. All one's tunnelling was always done in long johns, because you take your clothes off and you can work in them, but you must remember to put them on back to front. Otherwise you fill the slit up in front with everything. We'd made a little cubby hole fairly near the front. We probably dug about 30 feet and had about, I don't know, 120 or 150 feet to go in all, something like that, and started digging in earnest. And when he let the water in, I don't know, but all was well. It didn't come through to us. But there was only a foot to dig up anyway. Our digging was a little shovel, about that long, with the handle broken off, and you just hacked with that. But the digging was easy because it was all this loose sand. Scrape it back, crawl forward. The middleman then pulled that lot back, and the back first, and then came along and shoved it behind.
And all this in pitch darkness?
All in pitch darkness, but about every 10 feet, with an ordinary table knife, we put up a little air hole. I suppose it must have let a glimmer of light in underneath it, but otherwise not. But it was sufficient, if you've got two of those, to keep yourself pretty well in a straight line. And we had done a lot of practice in general tunnelling and keeping reasonably straight and knowing that you go around the bend one way or the other. I mean, you do instinctively somehow or other. We must have done, I should think, another 60 feet or something like that, that day. I mean, we did not dig at night. The Germans always thought we dug at night, and therefore switched on all the sound detectors on the wire at night time. Well, that's the last time you dig, because everything's so quiet, you daren't risk any noises anywhere at all. Well, we put our clothes on. Bill and I are the same sort of size, so we lay on facing each other, and Henry, being the little one, crawled on top to keep the fug in. Trouble was, after not a very long time, you start getting cramp, and you get very cold where you're touching the sides and the bottom, so you had to reverse all the procedures and do it. A watch was kept from the huts to see what was happening, and during the night at one time, one of the patrols came along with what we called their Schnuffelhund. The dog took a good sniff down the hole and sort of blew at it, but thank God he didn't start digging. So that was all right. Apparently next morning there was steam coming out of the hole, but the Germans didn't spot it. Well, we dug all next day again, and we realized we were getting pretty close to things. In fact, we did find the wire. It was well underground as far as I remember, and we knew we were beyond the tripwire, therefore you could make the hole much bigger to the tiny hole at the end, and made a big V shape, so you could get your head up close and you could see the wire and know exactly where we were. And towards evening, Bill was digging at that moment. He said, "I've had it," and we all said we'd had it. I mean, we were physically whacked. And so he said, "Right, we'll go up now, whatever happens," sort of thing, you know. We knew we were beyond the wire. And left it till nearly midnight, I think. In fact, it was the shortest night of the year, which of course is the longest day, but it's the shortest night that was affecting us. And we'd put all our clothes on again, obviously, but we were pretty filthy and pretty tired by then. And Bill broke through. He said, "We're not as far out as I hoped. We were only just beyond the pathway, just on the edge of the road, which was beyond where the sentry walked up and down." He said, "I'll wait. The sentry's got his back now. He'll be coming back soon. I'll wait till he's turned, and then I'll go." And he went, and all was quiet. Then Henry went, and all was quiet, and I went. We were very lucky, although it was frightfully close. 6 feet or so away from where the sentry were patrolling, it was in the shadow of a little pine tree, so the hole didn't show. We then got into the woods, and off we went. Well, apparently that hole wasn't found until next morning. When it got daylight, the guard saw it, and of course the balloon went up. The security officer came along on his bicycle. It was reported that He was in such a temper, in such a state. When he did see it, he couldn't get on his bicycle and kept falling off. Well, of course, that didn't do him any good with the jeering lot of creakies on the inside. Well, when we'd got there, going back to that night, we went straight off in the direction where we knew there was an aerodrome. We had got no maps of the area at all then. We hadn't been in the camp long enough. I can't remember how long. Well, I think we went there in April, and this must have been the end of June, so we'd been there 3 or 4 months. And things like that hadn't got going properly. But we did find the aerodrome, and we looked at it and decided that on the far side there was a tin hut, big tin hut, wasn't really a hangar, and a glider towing outfit behind it. And we thought, well, that's grand, we can crawl into the glider thing and see what happens. It was painted black. All was quiet. Odd aeroplanes came in, but they all flew away during the day. Do you know, and about lunchtime, the Hitlerjugend came along, and that what we wondered what the hell they were up to. They opened this hut, and they got a lot of gliders in there, and they started doing tow gliding with a little engine pulling them up, right alongside us. Luckily, nobody thought of looking in with us. It was a stinking hot day, and you were in this black painted glider, so you can imagine the heat. If they had found us, there'd been a bit of a problem. We hadn't got a stitch of clothing on by then. We took absolutely everything off and were still sweating. As I say, various light aeroplanes did arrive, but they all flew away, so that was no good at all. And at the end of the day, we put our clothes on and we said, this place is no good. I mean, it's a hopeless place to work from in any case, and we couldn't appear in public because our clothes were filthy. We'll walk off and carry on until we get to the River Oder. We'd all read Hornblower stories, and in one of them, in the Peninsular Wars, I forget who it was, pinched a boat, got on the river and escaped that way. We said we'll do the same. Well, we walked off, got to a little railway halt, and in the railway halt was a map of the railway in a bit of the surrounding country, rather pretty big, about, you know. So we broke into that and pinched that, and that was our only source of information as regards the map. And he lived down Bill's back. He was the biggest one of them, and he shoved it down under his jersey. I think we walked for about 3 nights. I'm vague on that, and we all are. We've all tried to work it out. I don't know if you've ever tried to walk on a railway line at night. It's absolute hell. You lose your balance on the railway line, and the sleepers are too close together and yet too far apart to take a stride. It's absolute murder. It doesn't do the temper any good. We spent the nights in little copses and things like that, full of mosquitoes, and a very long day. Then eventually we arrived at the river in reasonable hour, late at night, and risked walking in there. And there were lots of punts there. Great big long punts, I don't know what they were, 20 feet long, but they were all padlocked up. They all had their numbers on and all the rest of it. We went on, and eventually we did find one that wasn't padlocked up and had some oars. 3 oars, in fact, obviously 2 for, well, we watched them being in use. 2 were used for rowing and 1 for steering. Well, I don't think we did a very naval operation getting waterboard, or whatever you like to call it. However, we did get going. Then we got shouted at because there was an awful lot of traffic, barge traffic going up and down. They had groynes to increase the depth and the speed of flow in the middle. And of course we were going down the wrong side, because they drive on the wrong side in Germany compared to us. Then we were getting on jolly well, really. A hell of a long way to go to get down to Stettin, to get onto a neutral ship. But it started to rain. We thought we were going to stop sometime. So we pulled into the edge, got well away from the river, carrying the boat, turned it upside down and got underneath. It was nice and sheltered. Suddenly it was lifted and we were arrested for pinching a boat. They didn't even realise we were POWs. When we got back to the camp, and I can't remember how that was, there was Charlie the ferret, who must have been in frightful trouble for letting us escape. And he patted us all on the back and he said, "Best a tunnel," which was very sporting of him, because he must have been in awful trouble for it, but he appreciated what we'd done with that tunnel. And that was the end of that, straight into the cells for, I think it's only 12 days that time. We got 14 for being found in a tunnel and 12 for escaping. No rhyme or reason.
That was back at Sargon.
Back at Sargon, Luft 3, that's right. Then we went back into the camp just in the ordinary way, and sometime after that, one of the other ferrets that we knew well, in his broken English, said, "How's the tunnel?" And we said, "Tunnel, tunnel? No good digging tunnels here. We haven't got a map. We don't know where we are. You've just dumped us down in the godforsaken bit of Germany." We said, "Do you want a map?" And we said, "Yes." He said, "Right, I'll bring you one if you give me 30 marks. They knew we had illegal marks somehow or other, but I reported it to Jimmy Buckley, and he said, "Yes, fair enough, if you like to risk it." So we made an appointment, and he turned up in our room with the map, had a good look at it, looked all right. So Bill then went off down to another room to get the money. We hadn't even got the money in the hut. We weren't going to do that. Gave him the money, and he got his gun out and took the map back. Luckily, I suppose, Wingsday was messing with us at that time, the 6 of us. We told him about this, and he was furious, because he said this is the sort of thing that could really blow up into an unfortunate incident. Reported it to the commandant and got that ferret kicked out of the camp. He probably went to the sergeant compound next door. And then sometime after that, Bill and I were sent for and told we were going to go to Colditz either the next day or the day after.
Just the two of you?
Just the two of us. Well, Henry hadn't been involved in the bribery. So I suppose that was the reason. The doctor who'd come recently, an army doctor, and lived in the Vorlager, we never saw him unless he was sick, had come from Colditz. So we reported sick, went down and had a chat to him while he examined a non-existent abscess in our teeth or something.
This was a British doctor?
A British doctor, yes. And he gave us sort of a few things and sent messages back to various people. And then we went off to Colditz the next day.
While we're still on Sargon, were you aware of any of the other tunnels and things that were going on there?
Oh yes, one knew that one didn't know everything was going on, and you didn't inquire what was going on, and we were involved in lots of other tunnels, and were teaching other people on digging tunnels and things like that. Dick Edge one time ran one tunnel we had worked on. His theory was, because of disposal, start 3 tunnels from one block to meet 100 feet out. And if they all meet there, then you've got 200 feet of disposal to do. A very good idea. None of them got to the meeting place for one reason or another. I was the main digger on one of them, and I think Bill on another, and so on. But it was riddled with tunnels, really, there.
Because that was where they had the Tom, Dick and Harry tunnel, wasn't it?
No, no. That was another compound. I get muddled because when I was there was only the one compound and the sergeant's next door. The wooden horse took place in the compound we were in, which really was, to a certain extent, following on our basic idea of starting a tunnel further out. Unfortunately, while we were in the cells, before we got back into the main circulation again, 3 other people, I think it was, I forget now, decided that they would do the same as us, because what the Germans did immediately was to dig quite a deep tunnel around the camp on the outside perimeter, the far side of the guard wire, and they jumped into this trench, and dug a tunnel from there. But they hadn't practiced it first. And they all 3 got into a tiny little place, and one of them, and I've forgotten which one of the 3 it was, suffered from claustrophobia, and they all had to get out, and that was the end of that. It was a great pity, because it could have been a good scheme. They should have just bided their time. We, in fact, had got out halfway between two of their listening machines, which was luck. We didn't know where they were. The result of that was they doubled them up, so that put the Germans to a lot of trouble and expense, which all brings a little bit back somewhere from the war effort, right. Which was the whole point of escaping.
Yeah. So you were then sent to Colditz?
Then we were sent to Colditz.
And can you remember your first? Had you heard about Colditz before?
Oh yes.
You said from this book?
We'd heard about it from there. Two others had gone from Sagan already, that I knew very well indeed. They'd already gone to Colditz, and it was a place we knew of. We didn't know much about it except it was a castle. And
did you still think it was a Straflager at that time?
I think we did rather call it a Straflager, yes, instead of a Sonderlager.
So can you remember your first impressions of the castle when you first saw it?
Oh yes, when we arrived by train, and you get a very good view of the castle across from the station, and then walking up there across the bridge, you get a good view. But by God, it's a hell of a climb up the castle when you're carrying a little and all, and haven't got much food in you either. And then, no, there was no security there at all. Well, I mean a search, yes. When we'd arrived at Bath and came back now suddenly, they put us for a day or 2 days in a room on our own, away from the main camp, which I think was probably bugged. No, we were only there one night, and we played mad games that night. We were just being silly the way one is sometimes, and it's the best thing we could have done, I think. We didn't talk one word of seriousness at all, so the Germans must have wasted a lot of time listening to nothing, because we were immediately questioned when he came in, did you say anything there? But they didn't do that at all, because it just went a search and straight in. We'd been searched for, he left the other end.
And you say you knew?
Yes, right, and so when we got in there, some English faces came out, and I shouted up to know whether Bush Parker or Pat Dickinson were there, but I don't think either were there at that moment. They were in the cells as usual. But we made friends elsewhere very quickly.
Bush Parker was quite a fascinating chap.
Oh yes, he was, I think he came from Tasmania. He was an Australian anyway. No, he wasn't Tasmanian. He was a very, very good sleight of hand. That I wouldn't have played the 3-card trick with him for anything. He was extremely quick at all those sorts of things, and the French had taught him quite a lot about the manufacturing of keys. The Germans are very, very methodical people, and in their padlocks for their different levers, he'd been taught by the French that you put in a little bit of wire and measure the height of the lever from the central spindle, then lift it and measure it again, and you want to lift it exactly halfway up. You see, Germans were methodical. You get a good English lock, some mightn't even have to be lifted at all. It varying all the amount, and the same with the cruciform locks. They were all based on one variable only. Now, you take your English plunger locks, the Yale and so on, the variations on that are infinite, as well as a much more difficult key to make.
So, in fact, our locks would have been more difficult to pick?
I think so, oh yes. I'm not saying the ordinary locks in Colditz were very easy. I mean, I don't know how many lock picks I made. I got so fed up making them, because it was hard work filing it and hacksawing it out without a vice or anything. I got down and forged one for a chain. I always liked blacksmithy work, and I got a bit around down and forged it. Unfortunately, I brought it back to England and it got lost, which is rather sad. I think it's probably the only forged one ever made. There are plenty of the others in England anyway.
Yeah.
But the Colditz locks were basically only 3 keys to get right around Colditz, other than the cruciform locks. And the great thing of a cruciform lock is you can put it into any ordinary lock. It isn't a lock in itself necessarily, so they just fit a cruciform lock where you'd normally put the key in. You just put this little cruciform. You've probably seen them in the, well, they've got the Dr. and Vandy, and I forget his name's complete outfit for making and measuring the locks. You've probably seen it in Colditz. There's another one in England that a Royal Welsh Fusiliers officer has got. He knew how to make it because of Vandy having made it in the first place. He didn't actually make his initially for escaping purposes. He was a brewer and he wanted sugar, and he made it to pinch sugar off the chisels. But he was used for all the other locks as well.
So once you got into Colditz and you got established, because I think there was a process where they needed to know that you were okay.
Oh yes. Well, I mean, in our case, Bush Parker and Pat Dickinson would have vouched for us in the way that we vouched for other people when they came along from. Because no, it was absolutely done religiously, and thank goodness it was, because as you probably know, there was one traitor who came in many, or several years later, but it was checked much more rigorously then. That, I think, was checked under Cecil, the Canadian VC, Cecil Merritt. I think he was the man actually sort of running that side of security.
I mean, you were talking about Purdy there.
Yes, Purdy.
I think it was Mike Harvey realised.
It was one of the naval people anyway who'd known him.
Bit of a fan.
He was, although he was a traitor, he was only a fool, in my opinion. Yeah. He, as you might say, was pure and simply doing it for wine, women and song, and all he was doing was reading out names of people who'd been taken prisoner, so I gather. But he was sent into Colditz to get information. And he did see a party go up to the wireless. I'm sure he had no idea what they were doing or anything, but apparently he was about when it happened once.
Because that was kept fairly secret, wasn't it? The wireless?
Oh, completely. Yeah. I did know it was up in that part of the attic because I'd seen people go up once. And another time when I was up in the Belgian quarters, it was right up on the top where the Belgians had been. And all the bad British seemed to go up to the Belgian quarters. I wasn't there, wasn't bad enough, I don't think. But all the bad Marines and those sort of people were up there. And I was up there one day talking about something, and a knock came through the wall. So I then realised where the wires was, but I never told a soul. Because the less you know, the better.
That's right. So, having arrived at Colditz, did you then straight away get involved in escaping, or were there other things?
Oh no, I got involved pretty quickly. Firstly, we started doing under Dick Howe. Dick Howe was then the escape officer. No, I suppose in actual fact, Pat Reed was still, because I was there about 2 or 3 weeks with Pat Reed. I didn't ever get to know Pat then. I mean, I got to know him very well afterwards. But I don't think we did anything just to begin with, you know, and then we were put on to try and lift some tiles at the foot of the stairs of the old British quarters. That's to the right instead of the left of the chapel when you're looking at the chapel. It wasn't a good place to start a tunnel in any case. It's too public and everything else, and it didn't work. Then we got involved with Monty, and I can't think of his name now. He'd been dead for many years. He had a scheme to have a tunnel from the chapel. You could see from the chapel where there was a line sunk straight across the length of the courtyard to where the kitchens were, through the roof of which Pat Reed had escaped over. And we hoped there might be a tunnel. Well, how do you get into the chapel? And the answer there was near the top of our stairs on the older British quarters, there was a bricked up doorway into the chapel, which was right at the very top of the chapel. I dread to think how long it took us to get through. First thing was lifting up a wooden board. That was simple. Under the wooden board there was a solid block of stone, I would say 9 inches by 9 inches. We had to cut through that twice. Scrape, scrape, scrape. I mean, that's all it was. A very, very long job indeed.
What did you use?
Bits of art. Honestly, I cut table knives. I mean, originally saws, wood saws, were an ordinary table knife with nicks in it. It's not very efficient. You've got the taper the wrong way, so it gets thicker after where you cut the front and everything. But we were working on those sort of tools. Having got through it, we then found we were the underside of steps, going up to the doorway. Well, what we did then, you saw through one of the steps, absolutely close against the end. Then you can leave the step up, the tread up, I mean, and away. Take out the little bit that you've cut off and put it back, slide it in and wedge it, which you could do without anybody seeing. And that was, well, it was found eventually, but it was a lot longer after that. We then got into the chapel, and it's a long way down from the top to the bottom via the organ pumping place where all those great big air chambers up there, etc. And where we were going to start. Eventually we decided to start under the wooden steps going up to the pulpit, because there was a pile of rubble there. So that was not a bad place to start from. And we had to, again, make a hole in the steps in exactly the same way as we'd done the other, take the tread out. And under this rubble there was a wooden floor. We went through that, dug down through the earth, put a false trap in there, hoping that they'd not find the second trap if they found the first trap, and then started digging. And we did get right under the chapel floor, which was a wooden floor on top of the old slab floor. Well, you can see it all now, having been back there, and you can see what the French cut through, and what they cut through is astonishing. Anyway, there were pipes going down this tunnel, but the tunnel was only the size of the pipes, so that was no good. And we really were pretty well foxed what we were going to do then. We were still sort of digging down and investigating, but we weren't doing anything we might say positive, because we were not quite sure what to do, you know. It was used when Mike, Harvey and I became a ghost. That was where we hid initially, was down there. So it came in for that. I mean, the ghost came about because when we were digging that tunnel, it took a very long time to get in and out, as you can imagine. Therefore, you spent too much time getting in and out and not enough time working. It was getting to that state. And I may say it was quite an amusing episode that I didn't say. Monty Bissell, that's right. Monty Bissell was a very large man, even in those days. And he decided he'd come down and look at the tunnel. He'd never been all the way down before. He was organising it. And he went down with Dick Howe. That's right, they got in the chapel all right. It's a bit of a tight fit, but he squeezed through vertically. And when he came to get down through these steps up to the pulpit, Monty was just too big. He got in up to about here and jammed. Eventually he took even his pants off, and he was getting on quite well. Dick told me this, but his balls, his cock were out. So he got his ball, one ball in, put that, then he put the other ball in, and then that popped out. And he never got both balls together. It must have been absolutely hilarious. Dick always laughed about that right up until the end. So poor old Monty never made it. So
he'd have never got out through it if you...
No, he couldn't have done. I mean, these are the things that I'm sure you find is what people remember. The times they were frightened and the time they laughed like a dragon.
I always ask the question about boredom? Because there must have been lots of times when you were bored.
Yes, there were, but basically I think most of the time I was on some nefarious business to stop boredom. But there were still times, obviously, when you were absolutely bored. And I know at one time I suddenly realised I was going round the bend. I took myself metaphorically off in the corner of the room and gave myself a bloody good dressing down. As long as you can still do that, you're all right. You must catch it in time.
Because some people really couldn't take it, could they?
No, they couldn't, and that's no criticism of them. What is marvellous, there's one fellow who couldn't take it, repatriated, and we see him to this day, and he's strong and going well. It's marvellous. He wrote a very, very nice postcard back, or letter, thanking people while we were still in Colditz for helping him. You know, he appreciated what we were doing. But, well, we're all built differently. What I used to do there periodically on those spiral staircases going up, there are windows out, which are quite deep in the wall. Occasionally I'd crawl into one of those and just sit there, very often putting my face up against the window so the bar was vertical on my nose. Right, you can look out and there are no bars. Bars, they get you down psychologically. And people were good, they would leave you alone. Do you know? Because I don't think we realised, in fact I know we didn't collectively, how much help we got from each other. It's since, and more year by year, one realises more and more how much everybody helped everybody else, and that is why we get so much out of meeting up again.
Did you subscribe to the school of thought that said that solitary confinement wasn't always a bad thing?
No, I didn't. I loathed it.
Really?
There again, some people used to do it, be late on parade on purpose, because they wanted a bit of peace and quiet. No, I never went there for
You're
fun.
the first one that's ever actually said that to me.
Ever? No, I didn't like it. I ended up with 28 days, which for doing nothing. In other words, for being a ghost. We got 28 days because that really riled them more than anything else, I think.
So it messed up their method, I think.
Oh, it buggered everything up.
How much of a trial was the ghost? Because you, about 18 months ago, I said.
No, I was a fortnight under a year. Mike was about 3 weeks under a year. But before, because they found him.
And how much of that time was actually spent
Well,
in a cubbyhole?
in very rough terms, for the first 3 days, we were underground except for 1 hour a day. When we came up in the evening, there was some nice hot water and some clean clothes for us and a jolly good meal. People were frightfully good. I mean, the team spirit at Colditz was, well, it wasn't bad in other camps, but it was unbelievable in that camp, the way everybody would do anything and everything to help somebody who needed it at that particular moment. We did it like that for roughly 3 days. The next 3 weeks, we were up every night, sleeping in somebody else's bed. We didn't know whose bed it was going to be, and they took our place down below. So if the Germans did do a knob count at night, the knob count was correct. Then for the next 3 months, whether my figures are right or 3 in each case, it's roughly that, we never went outside the building, but lived a fairly normal life. But there was always somebody about who would shout goons up. And as soon as we heard there was going to be somebody coming, we'd go into a cupboard and lock it on the inside. If the Germans had wanted to open that cupboard, that would have been that. I always had a bunch of keys in my pocket. Mike and I would go off and do different things during parades. At one time we used to go across, we were both then in the room immediately over the chapel, having gone up the old British quarters, but there was a locked door between us and the French, the other side, and we'd unlock that door and go into one of their lavatories there. God knows why we did that, just to be different, I suppose. We were there once, and there was a Frenchman not on parade or something, and the Germans came up, and there were about 4 lavatories in one row, and another was 2. They went through the 4, not the 2 we were in. We were sitting there. I had my hand on the chain, and Mike had his hand with all the stuff that we shouldn't have had on us, practically underwater, ready to put it round the men while I pulled the plug. But they didn't come in. Alan was willing. In the Prominentes, if you go into the Prominente place, right to the back, as far as you can go, on your left, there's a little doorway. It isn't a doorway, it's a little hatchway, really, that goes into the hollow pillar on the outside of the castle. We used to go into that and lock ourselves in sometimes. Do you know?
Dutch.
That's right, where the Dutch had gone down, that's right. You know, we rung the changes as we felt. And of course, occasionally one or other of us would be on parade, taking somebody else's place.
They didn't recognise you?
Well, you see, we'd been out of sight for 3 months, not seen by anybody, and they'd forgotten us. After a bit, we did go into the courtyard, but not until the big invasion came of a lot of other British that came in and went into the corner of the Dutch quarters. And what we used to do was to get one of them to come to us and put on an army uniform and walk around the courtyard with them, so that the Germans would think we were one of them, not say, what's that face? 1 or 2 French who were still in the camp then, I gather, did spot us. Whether they spotted us, one of us or both, I don't know, but they worked out we were there. And latterly, we really lived a perfectly normal life. But you didn't go on parades, and you were always ready to make a run for it, as you might say.
So, did the ghosting come to an end then?
Well, can I give it a little before that? We used to get warning of searches, as a rule, but twice we were caught in a complete strip search. 2 extra bodies. Well, we both went through early on in the strip search as our doubles. My double was Bob Barnes, and Bartlett was Mike's double. And as soon as we got through, we'd hand back, somehow or other, their metal identification disc, and then go underground, quick. Get ourselves really locked away. And the others bullshit themselves through and said, well, I heard it was back in my handkerchief up that I dropped, or some silly excuse like that. It's quite incredible how gullible the Germans could be. Another time we got warning of a search, and it didn't in fact come off, that particular one, and we went and lived with the Dutch for 2 or 3 days. I found that very difficult. The Dutch and the British were definitely the best friends, and there was no secrets between the 2 nations at all, at any, might say, level. They were marvellous people. Our attitude to the Germans was, it was a German parade, and to hell with the Germans, we behaved as we felt like it. But we did behave just well enough to, well, not waste too much time if we didn't want to waste it. The Dutch, you got up at a certain time, and your bed was made correctly, all perfect, and you would put on your best uniform for every parade 4 times a day, and if you were late, right, you went to the German cells, and you then got room arrest from the Dutch, because you let the Dutch down. I'm not going to say that they were right, or we were right, or who was wrong. They were different methods, both extremely effective. But having, well, again, I've never been a very disciplined person, and I've been bullshit disciplined type. I find it very, very hard living with them, although they were super people, you know, but it was sort of sudden change in sort of attitude and life. But theirs was equally effective as ours.
Did you find it a lesser place once the other nations had gone?
No, I'm rather an insular person as regards nationalities and don't mix. Although, I mean, I'm not a linguist at all. Some people like language, I'm not. I mean, I quite consciously did not attempt to learn German there, partially, as I say, because I'm not a linguist, and what good would German be to me as a farmer in Kenya? But I said, if I was going to be a businessman, I'd have got down and learned German, because I could see even then that it was going to be a useful thing to learn. No, I didn't miss the foreigners going at all personally. A lot of people did, and I think they did produce character, and they'd probably same as us, sometimes good and sometimes bad. But then we also got character from the other people who came into Colditz, although they did alter with big numbers coming in together. When dribs and drabs are coming in, it was more of a small unit. But in any case, when things get bigger, you don't get the same atmosphere. It's the old thing, small is beautiful.
You're talking there about like groups like the Eichstätt.
Yes, yes, when they all came in. I mean, there were the two lots, the wire job and Tubby Broomhall going out as a general. I mean, they were the sort of the two big batches that came in. I mean, some of them came in with people I'd met before, do you know, and others I've not so much met before, but found out that they had relations in Kenya and all sorts of things, and met their brothers and relations after the war.
Because, I mean, the British contingent consisted of people from all over the empire.
Oh, completely, yes. Oh, very much. I mean, there was a strong, Australia was probably, Canadian initially because of the RAF, and there were an awful lot of Canadian short service commissions, and they were all bad types, and they all seemed to end up at Colditz. And they were all Don. It was Don, Tom, and Don something else. I can't remember now offhand. But I mean, we were a tremendous mixture from all over the British Empire, and a complete mixture in the different things we did, and how we'd been born and everything else. The only thing that mattered there was you. What are you? Doesn't matter what. It was the most marvellous atmosphere. It was the same in Kenya, I found. Well, in England there are too many layers, but they go sideways as well as up and down. There was only one layer where you were good tug, and the answer was yes in every case. You know, some were worse than others.
Because it was really that type of person that finished up there.
Oh yes. I mean, it was very interesting if you looked at all the services. Well, the Air Force, which undoubtedly had the finest escaping record of the services, but then who were they? They were all individualists. They were all air crew. And even in a bomber, how many are you? Very small numbers. Now, the naval people who came, it was either MTVs or submarines and one destroyer. I'm talking really of the regular Navy. When you get to the merchant Navy types, well, they're all sorts of types anyway, and they were on all sorts of ships. But it was an individual thing. If you're on a battleship, you don't think, you say yes and no, sir, and carry it out. You're not told to be thinking too much. Anyway, in those days, while on your others, you were thinking all the time.
That's interesting, that, because it never occurred to me before, but that is the case, isn't it? The RAF and, as you say, the Navy, submariners. And
yes, the Army were a mixture, as you might say, because, again, depending what you sometimes in the unit work, which was a big unit, sometimes a small little behind-the-lines unit. Well, David Sterling was the obvious example of that.
One of the things that's come over to me while I've been doing these interviews is what you just said about the comradeship or the togetherness of everybody.
Yes.
Everybody mentions that it was unique from that point of view.
Yes.
Everybody was looking out for everybody else. Really.
It was. It was the most astonishing unit. The people who lost out on it were the senior officers, who before my time had been in with the whole lot. When they moved off, I think everybody thought they'd be much better off. There were only 3 or 4 to a room and all that sort of thing, you know. But they lost the comradeship. And I know this talking to Willie Anderson and others. Well, there aren't many of them alive of them, because they were mainly older people, obviously. A lot of them were majors before the war, and 2 or 3 colonels.
So, when did the idea of the glider come up?
Ooh. Well, very, very early on, Bill produced it. And Bill and I used to work together on not only escaping things, but non-escaping things, and making all sorts of odd jobs. You know, it was a pipe dream. Well, I mean, basically, I think all RAF pipe dream was to pinch an aeroplane and fly it back to England. The real danger of that was, where do you land in England? And the answer is, you don't know where, so you land in the first field you can find, and then Farmer Giles comes up with a pitchfork. And you might even be in imitation German uniform, and a very undignified end a pitchfork would be. It never got to that state. Lorne Welsh and Walter Morris are the only people I know actually got into an aeroplane, and they had bad luck. They eventually got into it on the aerodrome that we'd gone to.
Did they?
Yes, having gone round some others first. That was very bad luck. What would happen next, who knows?
And there was a German, von Vera, who did the same thing here, wasn't there?
There were 2, I heard. One lot pinched a Maggie and got into a Maggie and hadn't got enough petrol, so they had to land to refuel and got bowled out. They'd actually got airborne to begin with. This is hearsay, and got bowled out then. And then there was the other one who, again, this is all hearsay, got himself to Derby, rang up RAF, whatever it was, and got RAF transport and taken out to the Rolls-Royce place where they were assembling Spitfires, etc., and putting engines in them. He was quite quick. He was pretending to be a Pole, so that was excusing his bad English. He probably in Polish sort of uniform. And he spotted one that was obviously just about ready, said, "I've come to collect aircraft number so-and-so." And that was all right. But apparently he didn't ask the man working on it some rather elementary questions about, and got bowled over like that. Whereupon I gather that the RAF gave Rolls-Royce a hell of a bottle for allowing them anywhere near it, and the Rolls-Royce said, well, after all, he did come up in RAF transport. After that, nothing more was said.
He actually
bad luck.
toured the prison camps in Germany. Did he come to Colditz? That you
No, that was another fellow again. How he escaped, I don't know. He went to Canada. And I believe before he, let me get this right, yeah, that's right. He escaped from there, and they were feted all across America. And then he did go around Zargan. I never met him. And he insisted on going round on his own and talked to people absolutely straight. And when he was asked what was the food like, he said really it was far too much fish for breakfast. He was appalled really at the conditions that they were living in. He was obviously a decent type.
That's actually mentioned in Walter Morrison's book.
Oh, it is. Well, Walter was probably there when he met him. But I know after that, the Americans got ticked off by the British and said, look, these things happen and they escape. Just pass them through quietly, don't fate them. So the next lot that got through there, they put them in chains and sent them back to Canada. What a balls up to me. I mean, poor devils being sent back. I'm afraid the Americans usually get the balance wrong, and still do.
You were going to tell us about how the ghosting finished?
Oh yes, how the ghosting finished. Well, can I tell you first of all, when the ghosting started, obviously we weren't present, but in fact Van Rood and somebody else had made an attempt to escape that day and got caught and dropped a careless remark about hinting there might have been somebody else ahead, you know. It was all part of the arrangement. They then had the usual business of counting everybody. Well, that takes half an hour or more. I don't know if you've heard about the way two small people get one on each other's shoulders and all that sort of nonsense going on for hours and hours. And they had learnt by then that it was very dangerous not to have their tables up tight against the wall, otherwise somebody came in from somewhere and pinched some of their records. But what they did then was the first people up dropped a whole lot of water bombs straight on top of it and landed in their stuff. And then Bush Parker, it was not dark by then, Bush Parker with his catapult got the main light in the courtyard. So the whole courtyard was in pitch darkness. Well, Eggers, in his book, I know he mentions it, he then realized that was no good. So he took them quickly up to a disused part of the castle and carried on there. And then the lights fused. He said there's only one thing to do then. There was to sit on the records before they got evaporated. Eggert had his points. He appreciated our points occasionally, but he had a job to do as well, and he was clever. Now you were asking about how it ended. Well, I'd already escaped as a ghost with Mike Sinclair and given my name when I was caught as Bob Barnes, who was naval. I'd already escaped in John Davis's uniform. He'd very kindly lent me his complete, well, I say lent, it turned out to be loan, but he gave me his uniform. You take a naval uniform, which is very high-breasted, double-breasted, take the top button off and open it up, and it's quite a decent gents natty suit. And I'd gone out with that with two sets of buttons on. His brass buttons, not too firmly sewn on, and some ordinary old-fashioned 78 Rev buttons made of those records and holes punched in them, again loose, so that either way round I could play it. Well, the second Mike and I got out, we threw the brass buttons away quick, and when I came back into the camp, I immediately sent for naval buttons and got them sewn on again quickly. So I got the uniform back again to John, and I posed as Bob Barnes, and he had immediately taken my place as a ghost, and they never spotted that. Then Mike and Bush Parker tried. Well, it was rather a desperate escape, not so much in risk as in other ways, going out of the Zal house and getting into that area just before the guard house, where there's a little door underneath, get in. They thought they'd seen people go in there and never come out. Well, they went in there and there was no other exit. So that was that. That was just bad luck, and they were caught. And Mike gave his name as Bartlett. And Bartlett, you know, was ready for this. And that was accepted. But when he got into the cells, the Veldwebel, the sergeant there, said, no, that is not Bartlett. I know Bartlett. He was in here a month ago. I don't know who it is, but it's not Bartlett. So they then came in to get Bartlett. And they caught Bartlett. He was talking to me, discussing our next move. They marched him off, and away he went. He gave gave his name as Jack Champ. They'd all learnt about each other, and Bartlett had held a finger to give a little wound on his hand, you know, and all that sort of nonsense. And in fact, I was rereading Jack Champ's book the other day, because he and I are in twice-a-year correspondence, because we discovered a few years ago that our birthday was on the same date, although he's a year younger than me, and we both had our birthday this month. We've been quite a lot of correspondence going on between us. And he had not been briefed that he was to be Bartlett's double. So when they came in to get Bartlett, they asked his name, with Bartlett present, and of course he said Jack Champ. And Bartlett said, good God, weren't you briefed? That was just bad luck. Well, as soon as that happened, it was obvious my number was up. Well, the point had gone, and anyway, I wouldn't have gone back and started again, you know. No letters, which was a problem, things like that. And I just played it carefully, but with an open mind. And one day they changed the bed linen, and at the same time they changed the bed linen, they did an identification parade, and they really went to town on Bob Barnes. And he told me all about it. And in the afternoon I was leaning against the wall by the entrance to the Promenade, and a couple of the Germans came in and marched straight towards me. So I handed my bunch of keys over to whoever was with me at that moment, and I was taken out, and Eggers appeared, and he said I was best and not Barnes. I said, you're talking nonsense. I said, don't you remember? And I told him every little detail that had happened in the morning with him, but he said no. He said, well, he said, can I take your fingerprints? And I said, yes. And he said, look, I'm not a fingerprint expert, but he said, I'm good enough to know the fingerprint you've just given me isn't the same as this one on Barnes's thing. And I still went on arguing. He said, all right, if you say that, I'll have to get all your fingerprints back from Berlin. So we knew what had happened to our fingerprints and details. And you'll have to go into protective arrest until the time they come back. I said, well, what do you mean by protective arrest? He said, well, you'll have to be in solitary confinement, but you can have Red Cross parcels. I said, nothing doing, you win. I had to translate that to him. I then was slightly rude, and before he sent me back to camp, I said, would you like me to attend parades in future? I might as well have a laugh. We did indent for all our back letters and our pay. We didn't get it. And food. Because fish, we'd had no food. Everybody was producing a fraction towards us. Letters, well, people have been awfully good. Initially, I used to get people to write the letter for me to my mother in her maiden name at her old home. I'd sort of do it in roundabout ways like that. And eventually I used to write the letter myself. You wouldn't have done that in an RAF camp. All the time we were at Colditz, all our letters were still censored at Zargan by the same censor. And the censor knew every person whose letters he censored, and when he went on leave, none of our letters were censored, one way or the other. I mean, eventually we got people in England to write to us at Zargan and not at Colditz. Otherwise they came to Colditz, were then sent to Zargan and came back again. In fact, I had an old girlfriend who used to write to me when I was in Colditz. And she was also writing to another old boyfriend, also in Colditz, and didn't realize we were both in the same camp because we had different addresses. Rather extraordinary.
Going back to your escape with Mike, that was the one on the terrace down
Yes, yes.
I've just been rereading Grizz's book.
Yes.
And he says in there about the number of times you had false starts, because it depended on...
Oh, yes, I mean, it was... Well, it was known as the 60-second escape, because there was only 60 seconds when it could happen, and it didn't happen every other night. Every night, I mean. I think it was only one false start we had, but I mean, absolutely everything ready. I'd even been given a lovely tot of imitation elk, well, you know, potato elk and all the rest of it. I didn't get one the next time from that fellow, but it was sort of, you know, everything was pretty tight. What did happen on the final night was, I didn't confess it until after the war. Bill Goldfinch and I used to take quite an interest in keeping the sanitation going one way and another. It was one of the sort of many odd jobs lots of people did in different ways. And I can't remember what was wrong, but anyway, I reported a fact that something had gone wrong. And damn me if the German didn't turn up on the very floor we were on to inspect it while we were just about to go. I didn't dare confess that to anybody for just the time.
So that, all in all, that was quite a hairy escape, wasn't it?
Oh, it was, yes. The one thing they got wrong in all the pictures is we were put on two tables as a trestle, Mike in front. Now, he went out feet first. I said, no, I'm going out back first going out head first on my back, because the second you're through the window, you can pull yourself up on the bars and get out much quicker. Very good practical sense of the organizer was Dick Howe to allow you to do what you wanted. In fact, we'd practiced going through a hole that exact size at the top of the stairs, where you've got quite a drop on those spiral stairs, so we knew the form of how to do it and all the rest of it, practicing it. But
and then you had to get through the barbed wire along the edge of the terrace.
That's right. Well, what happened was Mike went, he was first all the way. The rope went out and he went out, and I was, well, you know, practically touching him going down. The second he hit the terrace, he started disentangling the rope in case it had got tangled up. My job was to get the end of the rope, which was obvious by then, to which was tied the attaché case, a little handbag we got, and throw that over the terrace. Which of us pressed the bell, nobody knows, but one or other, or even both, pressed the bell. And Mike went down the next bit. The length of the rope was perfect in that it was about a foot short, and the attaché case had fallen off because it was only tied on, you know, with a tiny bit of string. And we were there to lay there and wait for the music signal. As I went down, I heard the door opening into the guard room. I couldn't tell Mike that. The rope went back at an unbelievable speed. They'd heard it also. And the guard came out wearing spectacles from a room where the electric light was to outside where the floodlights hadn't come on, it was dusk. And he didn't know if he'd seen the rope go up or not, if you know what I mean. We got the all clear signal. They knew nothing about this. Luckily, he was obviously looking at the castle when we ran across the garden, which unfortunately had been dug fairly recently. We left great footprints in, which he hadn't reckoned on. Mike went to the left of the sentry box, because that was the blind side from the sentry who would get a walk up and down the other side, and I went into it. He was to cut the wire, hook the rope of the metal loop rather of the rope onto a post and go down the next drop. Cutting a wire is very noisy. It pings up the length. Doesn't matter what you do, it happens. So you decide you cut them very slowly. 1, 2, 3 we had to cut. And the timing was unbelievable because Mike knew nothing. He cut one, and the guard, I saw him turn around and look. Nothing there. Looked back there, Mike cut the next. That happened with all 3 cuts. And he then gave a weight and went through and away. I must admit I wasn't entirely happy watching all this, knowing what was going on. We looked away again after Mike had gone. So I went through and lay on the parapet. I had some shoelaces with a little bit of wire on one end to hook up the cut wires in the hope that they'd look all right. They wouldn't know we'd escaped, and somebody else could escape by that method another night. So I was busy doing that, and I also had to unhook the metal hook round the post, balance it like this on the end of the parapet, and go down, and then flick it off and leave the rope there. Of course, I arrived down there and I didn't bring the rope as well for which I got my balls well and truly chewed off, and rightly so, by Mike, till I explained to him what had happened.
He knew nothing of the guards coming out of the... He knew nothing of the guards?
No, he hadn't known a thing.
No.
He was lucky up in at that moment. We then had to scrabble along that slope, which, as you've seen, it's about a 45-degree slope, and it had barbed wire about a foot high spread all over it. Of course, we'd no idea what was there at all, so we slithered and skidded, tearing our clothes in doing that. Then we got off there, and there was another wire to cut. Well, we just made great big holes in that, and immediately beyond it was a bit of a sort of a quarry. I don't know, 10, 15 feet perhaps high. Mike didn't spot it up properly, I suppose, and he slipped and went flat on his face and didn't move for ages. Well, in fact, it was probably a moment, but you know, the impression to me was he didn't move and that he'd really hurt himself, but in fact he was up in a flash. I went round the edge and joined him. We went down into the backyard of a house that you could see down there. I stripped off my brass buttons, I don't know what I did with them now, opened the gate and walked out, owning the place, and just walked down the river, which we just carried on doing, not talking to each other or anything, and turned off after a time. The river goes off the left as far as I remember, and walked across the country. We were going to go to a railway station, not Colditz, another one. It was a pitch black night. We walked into fences. I don't know if you ever done it. You're walking along and you hit a fence. It's the most unnerving thing. And we had to repair our clothes. I had said, let's take a needle and cotton, ready threaded in case. Well, I had a split, a 3/4 cut, about that size, in my coat. Well, we repaired what we could on our trousers, the needle and thread, and that, I think we had some safety pins and did it roughly with that, and I then carried the briefcase all the time on that. One of the nights or times during the train, I suddenly looked at it and I read on the lock, made in England. But nobody ever spotted that, even at the end. It's amazing what Allah does for you and what Allah doesn't do for you. And you had to have Allah, or whatever you like to call it, with you. And Allah wasn't with us over pressing the button, but it turned out all right. And then when we got to Rhina, Allah wasn't with us, and there was a policeman obviously looking out of the window, probably thinking of nothing in particular, or thinking something, suddenly saw me. Mike could have got away with it, with his fair hair, red face, and brown clothes. I was dead white from being a ghost. What hair I had was dark, and I was in black clothes and a black hat. And I just stuck out like a sore thumb.
I didn't, with his escapes, because some of them were so clever.
I mean, if Grizz had gone with him instead of me, that wouldn't have happened. You can't say they got away, but that wouldn't have happened.
And that was on the cards at one time, I believe, was it?
Yes. Well, I'd always thought it was, and then reading Grizz's book, he confirmed it. Well, I mean, he and Grizz were tremendous friends. I was put on it as a ghost. I mean, it was one of the things we were told, as a ghost, you went straight to the top of any odds and sods that were needed, you know. Obviously, the originators go to the top, and then you came in. It was a perk. Yeah. And Mike and I mean, I had helped Mike quite a lot with it, but I couldn't always because it conflicted with working on the glider, which we'd been working at flat out for a long time.
How long did you actually work on the glider?
We always call it 9 months. we don't know. A nice, simple, pregnant figure. No, I don't know what it was. But it was a very long time.
And lots of people were involved in it, weren't they?
Oh yes. Initially, we started very quietly and told nobody anything at all. But soon after we got up into the glider workshop, we realized that it was no good keeping quiet. We had to do the opposite, and we went completely public. Everybody knew about it, and everybody could come up and see it, provided they did their weight while they were up. I mean, Todd came up, and anybody who didn't come up, well, it's just because they didn't want to. You see, on an ordinary shift when you were working, we'd be 4 of us up there anyway. In the Belgian quarters, there was one of our apostles, and they were on duty, watching the door up, went to us, and receiving messages. And there were probably another 3 other students passing information to him. We normally had him there initially for an hour. And somebody, I've no idea who it was, I didn't want to remember it at the time because it wasn't their fault, it was ours. An hour is too long for somebody to do that concentration, and something went wrong, but there was no damage. So after that, we gave them a half-hour shift, and they were there. As soon as they got there, they put a white towel out. That meant they were on duty. And they had 3 coloured tin bottles. One was okay, one was keep quiet, and the other, another one was utter danger, they're coming up your stairs. And the other one was come out and order, because you were completely in their hand. And if anything went wrong in the room was searched, which could happen, pull in the white towel and go to water the library in the Saal house. It only happened once, and they searched the library in the Saal house at the same time. But because whoever was on duty, again I've forgotten who it was, knew what could be seen through our little spy hole, he went into the courtyard with a book of the right colour, flaunted his towel and sat down, luckily it was not raining, and got us out quick. You see, you had to have really intelligent people doing it. Jack Champ was one, and I wrote to him a couple of days ago and asked him to let me know who the others were, if he could remember. I can remember 4 or 5 out of a dozen, just out of interest. We've all forgotten.
It's so long ago, isn't it?
It's so long ago. But it was right to go public, although it's right normally to tell nobody anything. But when the thing is going on for such a long time, and so many people involved, they're going to give you a better service if they know exactly what they're doing and not just stooging. And the stooges could be any rank. A boring job, but people did it. And as we called it in the RAF, there was the duty pilot was there 24 hours a day, and he could tell you how many Germans were in the camp and who they were. Do you know? The Germans used to come up and report on and off duty in the end. They knew we were doing it. They couldn't stop it, because if they stopped it there, we'd do it somewhere else. You know? So they learned to live with it.
Can you, talking about the Germans in Colditz, do you recall much about the people you had contact with, Eggers?
Oh, well, I corresponded a lot with Eggers after the war. In fact, I had a letter from him 3 days before he died. Oh yes, one knew him. I didn't like him. He was a smarmy type. He knew his English well. I mean, his English was good, not perfect, but it was good. And he knew the English mentality. He knew that he must never lose his temper, or show anything like that. He did once when he lost his hat. Did you hear about that? And he got it back in England. But as I told Eggers after, I said, when he was made security officer, we were very cross, because we knew he knew the English mentality better than anybody else. I did after the war. I don't know if you know, before the war, we used to bring parties of schoolboys over to the grammar school in Chiltern. I lost contact with him, but I was in contact with one of them for a long time. And he went back to Germany. In fact, he picked up contact with Eggers again after the war, And that model airfix glider I showed you, he took one of those out for me to give to Eggers for his grandchild. I knew he'd appreciate it. I mean, I wouldn't have wanted to upset him then, because what's the point? And that was the letter I had for him, thanking me for sending it.
What about people like Preem and Pupka?
Preem I didn't really know much. He left soon after I got there. Pupka, one had a lot of respect for him. He did his job perfectly. Never put a foot wrong. A serious type. But he behaved absolutely perfectly all the time. No, he was a person you can admire. The last private, wasn't it, the last commandant, I mean, he was a smarmy shit. I mean, I saw him once, when I was a ghost, in fact. We, the second or third time, didn't salute him when we came into the courtyard, which we should have done, agree. But we didn't. We didn't feel like it, didn't like it. All right, he was ready for it. The guard came in and cleared us out of the courtyard quick. I went quicker than anybody else because, being ghost, I wanted to disappear. And apparently he did mumble, "Don't show your face at the window, otherwise you'll be shot." I did get it. Somebody was playing the piano up in the Zala house, heard a shot. What did he do? Go to the window. Luckily they missed him. I was in the room over the chapel, and he was standing over by the kitchen, over that area, and I was very careful showing my face that only he and the guard could see it. He saw my face to the guard like that. Well, that's not on, is it? No, but at the end, of course, he was all over us.
All in all, though, you didn't see much of the commandants at all. There were few commandants.
No. That was really the SBO had his irregular contacts with him. And what a job they had.
What, the SBO?
Yes. Very difficult job.
Keeping the peace between.
Yes, and having to do things that they knew would be unpopular with us, because it was obviously the wrong thing to do, but it was the right thing to do because he was getting something else, which they couldn't tell everybody.
According to Grizz's book, Todd got blamed for the Prominenti being taken away after that.
Yes, he did.
Which was a bit out of order, wasn't it?
Utterly out of order. I won't tell you who did it and why. Well, I mean, I don't know why, but I won't say who did it because what's the object? But it was a thing that should never have happened. I mean, I was involved, you can say, in the moving of Providenti, in that Bill Goldfinch and I were standing by to hide them in the glider, where it's taken some time to find them. If you know, I mean, if they ever found them, but there'd have been blood flowing. And that was what Willie Todd had to sort of balance out. And Charlie Hopeton was not at all well at that time. It was really John Elphinstone was sort of in charge. And I gather he said, no, we've got to go. I mean, knowing all the risks and everything, but it was the risk for the least number of people. And it's a nasty decision to have to make. But Willie Todd was exceptional. He was my first senior British officer at Beaver Rock and went last. Although at Colditz there were two others. There was Daddy Stainer and Guy German. Both of them magnificent in different ways. I did fellow in Brussels, Peter Allen, tell you about when he was interpreter once with him on parade, and the Germans started shouting at old Daddy Stainer, and Daddy said, "Tell them I'm not deaf." Just quietly like that, and an immediate effect. He was brilliant in a very quiet way. It didn't show. He gave us the best order I've ever had in my life. I was in the front rank in the winter, waiting to be counted, and we were pelting the French the snowballs while they were being counted. It wasn't cricket. But they'd do the same to us. But the other way, it was odd, you know, it was all friendly. But it was getting a bit much. And he was standing just in front of me. He turned round, he had a slightly high voice. He said, British officers, will you stop saying throw balls at the French? We did. And Daddy laughed more than anybody else. It was a marvellous order to be given. And he was a great character. And so was Guy Derman.
So, I mean, we're at the end of the war now, talking about the Prominente going. Can you remember the run-up to the liberation of the castle?
Oh, yes, very much. First of all, we were ordered to move, and we were all set. In fact, what was going to happen was David Stirling in charge, Treco, Bill and myself, I think it was only the four of us, were going to stay behind in the glider place. We got it stocked with food and a reasonable amount of water. Treco had a girl, as you probably know about her. Her husband rang me up last Sunday. He rings me up about once a month from Los Angeles. But she was going to walk the streets, wearing different clothes and different streets, meaning different information, so that if the camp had been moved, we'd have stayed behind, because if they moved, what was going to happen? You know, who knew already? Daddy Todd outbluffed. And he just said he wouldn't move. And Proudwick realized he hadn't got enough troops to force us. Although he had more than we were, he couldn't really control us. But the arrangement was that as there was an SS division in the area, the guards would still stay on, but we would take charge of the camp. And we got everything out. We got the wireless out, started using it openly, and Eggers came along, and his mouth fell open. He said, you know, we often thought you had a wireless, because when the news was good from your point of view, we thought you were more cheerful in the morning on parade, but we searched and searched and searched and never found it, and thought, well, it must be our imagination. Now that showed they were listening to it, which was death. I mean, that was the penalty if you were caught listening to it. But it shook him that. I still am so upset we never took him up to show him the glider. That would have been terrific. I mean, he hadn't a clue about it, not a clue. He admitted that, and yet I'd been the other side of the wooden wall. Well, he and or one of his ferrets have banged this wooden wall and didn't realize it wasn't masonry. Alan was willing. That's all you can say.
That must have been a marvellous piece of camouflage, that thing.
It was. It was a week's worry as it dried out and cracked. And we went up every day and patched it. Thing was, it's a very long building there, isn't it? What is it, 100 feet, 90 feet? Something like that. Pitch dark, because there were no skylights in those days. And torches only. Well, torches don't show up like ordinary light does properly. No, it was amazing.
So you did all that work with torches?
With
just torches?
They did. Oh no, we had light. We took tiles out. Originally we took out 2 or 3 tiles and put them back. One slipped one day. This was luckily on the outside. And well, tiles do fall off a roof occasionally, but you wouldn't dare risk another one. I mean, that was bad enough anyway. So after that, we had a bit of 3-ply and put that in. Well, you can't see that roof very easily, even across the valley. It can be seen, yes, with a pair of field glasses looking for trouble, but it was a gamble. And that worked. So I mean, we had quite reasonable light there.
So
eventually we did have electric light.
Did you?
Because they put electric light into the room below before the French arrived when they came back. But we managed to stop the French using that room. But we took the electric light up there for another wireless and for light.
When all that huge number of French came in just before the end.
Yes.
How long was that before the liberation?
10 days.
Oh, it wasn't.
Might have been a fortnight, I can't remember.
That must have made a hell of a change.
Oh, well, I reckon we were all counting our rooms then, and the French in the courtyard, I think. But they couldn't count them. I reckoned if we'd all been in the courtyard together, there'd have been 3 per square yard.
Really?
Do you know, we were slightly overcrowded. But after that, we took, as I say, the camp over. We'd already, Bill and I, made a couple of pulleys for turning the electric motor that drove the pump for the organ to be turned mechanically to make electricity for the wireless set. Because in no time at all the power did go off and the battle started. In fact, the gearing up wasn't enough, so quickly made on a much more primitive way, but you can do things when you've got nobody over your hands in a different way. They put an intermediate thing in. By God, there's 2 people turning the wheel, had to work hard to get enough juice out of this to work the wireless.
But it worked?
Oh yes, it did, yes. It was rigged up in the open. And then the last 24 hours was really exciting. I mean, in the morning, the Germans came in view looking straight across the river over the station. And you could see them with the naked eye. And you know what I mean by a electroscope? I remember borrowing somebody's electroscope and getting it onto a gunner. And you could see him, it was Lewis gun, not a Lewis gun, whatever the automatic guns were there. You could see him press it, you could see him vibrating like that, and you automatically ducked. I mean, they were incredibly efficient. And we watched them advancing. We were all forbidden, we were all ordered to be at the base of the stairs as being the safest place, because they might have shelled. In fact, they did drop one shell in, which luckily fell in the German part of the courtyard, and then they saw the Stars and Stripes and the French flag. I'm not sure we had a French flag, I doubt if we did, but a Union Jack we had ready, a big one hung out of the window. Bill and I had avoided the order until we were caught. We were right up watching the whole battle early on from the where we built a glider, and had the radio, the crystal set going as well. It was really rather fun. The next morning, I was in the corner room on the ground floor of the eventual British quarters, and you could watch the gunner, you saw the flash, and ducked. In spite of that, a chip got me here. I didn't look. I gave up looking after that. I realized what a bloody fool I was. But they were brilliantly effective. They weren't shelling the village. They were dropping them into the field just down there, until the white flag went up in every house. And even then, when they came along, they never walked around a corner without cover. No. They were brilliantly effective. With no discipline in the British sense, but very, very efficient. And we were talking to some of them afterwards, and they said, oh yes, there was some Hitler Jugend there. They were out to fire at us. What can you do? And what was quite amusing, the British had, as soon as they had come in, the British set up an organisation with an orderly office and all the rest of that bull. And somebody went down from the British to the American one, over something, or the American equivalent about some or other thing. And he went in there, and while he was in there, a GI came in and said to the officer, he said, I'm off. I'm not going to be bugging about by that sergeant anymore. He's bugging me about twice too often. I'm off now. Turned around and walked out. And the officer, the British fellow, said, well, I guess he feels better now. I mean, that wouldn't happen in the British thing, but they were incredibly fit. They were incredibly fit. and incredibly efficient. I remember them coming in, one or two of them came to where we were sitting chatting, and one said, "Oh, I'm hungry." And the other one went off and got about 3 tins of something or other, and they opened and bashed them and ate them in front of us. They never thought of that we were hungry. I'm not blaming them.
No, no.
Well, Jack Champ, reading his book, he was another part of the castle, they realized there they were hungry, or the Australians said, maybe they said they were bloody hungry, and they got fed really good and proper. But they were very, very efficient. But it was the first time they'd had a shot fired in anger at them, except from an aeroplane once, since they crossed the Rhine.
Really?
And that was the furthest east they went.
There was a German field gun or something behind the castle.
Yes.
Yeah.
But they were up, the other side of the valley, up in the one Hitlerjugend. I believe that's all it was. And there were a few in the top of one of those tall factories, sort of over on the other side. And just those 2 gun emplacements held up the advance for 24 hours.
Did they?
Because they were being careful, you know.
Were the SS group that were there, had they gone by?
They'd gone, I think, yes. Yes, they'd gone by then, and really there was nobody there. They tried to blow up that bridge.
That's right.
They blew half up.
So
Totally inefficient.
the Americans didn't progress much further east?
No, not at all. They came purely to get us out because of the Prominenti. But they didn't. The Air Force knew where we were exactly, but they hadn't told the Army commanders that we were in the castle. Thank God the Air Force knew. And thank God we had those things to put out.
But of course the Prominenti had gone by then.
Prominenti gone by then, yes. And then after we left, or was it before, I forget now, some French went out for a bit of a walk, and they walked the wrong way and got picked up again. I mean,
that's how close it was.
Yeah, and coming back, we had to stop and turn around and get out of one wood quick. We were going the wrong way. There were still pockets about. And another time we had a puncture, stopped, and there was an American artillery unit getting themselves set up. And they said, "What are you going to do?" Oh no, they were set up, that's right, and they were firing around every few minutes, whatever it was, at Leipzig, because Leipzig had been bypassed. And what are you firing at? We said, "Oh, we're firing as an 88 battery. They haven't got properly set up yet. I should think it will be about another 10 minutes or a quarter of an hour before they start answering." Thank God we'd gone by then, because we only had one interest then, get home.
Do you remember the flight home?
Oh yes. We went to a place called Kalida that night where there were just lots and lots of tins in boiling water ready to eat, you know, and dossed down on straw here, there and everywhere. And then we just sat about next morning waiting for some Air Force to drop in and take us back. In fact, what had happened is the Dakotas were ferrying supplies and were told to drop into Kalida and pick up any POWs who were there and take them back. We all went back to different places. Well, I say all. We, airplane I was in, quite amusing, is Norman Forbes, who died some time ago, was a great friend of Bill and mine. I'd been to school with him as well. We'd sat down shortly before he took off, made a real disgusting bash of condensed milk, dried milk, and chocolate, and God knows what. Norman lost his in the aeroplane. Bill kept his till he got to the ground, and I never lost mine, but it was pretty close. But anyway, we stopped to refuel in Brussels every time I've been there. And there was quite an RAF contingent there, and some Spitfires. And we went over and said, "Are these Spitfires?" And they looked at us. We'd never seen a Spitfire before, any of us. You know. And then we landed near Banbury, I forget exactly where now. And they were absolutely marvellous. For a Red Cross, and any girls who were in any unit anywhere had been asked to come along. And first thing he did was undo your trousers and puff you full of bug-killing stuff, you don't know what, which gave everybody fits of laughter. Then they filled us up with more and more and more rolls, Swiss rolls, I can remember them now. And these girls came along and were just chatting to us, you know. It was quite incredible and marvellous. Then the Navy and the Army went off, and we were just left the RAF contingent of, I don't know what we were, 20 dozen or so. And they didn't know what to do with us. They'd never had more than 2 or 3 before, and then they sent them to London and then on to Cosford, which is just north of Wolverhampton. And eventually they chartered a train for us, and we got there at about, oh, I don't know, 1 or 2 in the morning. And I must say they were marvellous. They'd been waiting up for us all night. As soon as we got there, they said, now don't rush, they thought we might fall down dead on the any moment. Went off to the mess, given a breakfast of bacon and eggs. Went, taken upstairs, and there was a proper bed, properly made out, and a pair of pajamas, and a little Red Cross bag alongside with a toothbrush and hairbrush and, you know, all the sort of little razor, little necessities of life. And I told, right, get up when you like in the morning. No hurry, nothing to order, come down. And we went down fairly early, you know, you wake up, although we slept like log on these lovely comfortable beds. And there was another bacon and eggs. And then we realized we were the only people having bacon and eggs. They were having a bit of bacon or a bit of something else. You know, they were really absolutely marvellous. We had the old hospital blue and clothes dumped by our bed. We all appeared in them next morning wandering round. Ran into a sergeant I'd known as an orderly in Bath and Sarg. It was a great fun to meet him. And then during the course of that day, they gave us a very rough medical. Just enough to see you were fit enough to go home, and an x-ray. They'd learned about TB by then, and issued you on loan with a complete set of clothing, underclothes, the lot, shoes, uniform, battle dress, got any medals if you had them, and most of us hadn't got a medal anyway. Everybody else had, but nothing like that to come through. Got your wings and your rank sewn on. A tenner in your pocket or whatever it was a lot of money then anyway. Ticket home, and double rations for 3 weeks. And not a proper pass, but a bit of paper saying you were all right. And photographs taken, and very, very quick intelligence form to fill in. And in fact it was doubled from 3 weeks to 6 weeks. And that was that.
And